The night had always been their sanctuary. Elena remembered how she and Alexander would sit on the balcony of their modest apartment, long before the skyscrapers and boardrooms claimed him. The city lights had seemed endless back then, but nothing compared to the brightness in his eyes when he would talk about his dreams. He had been a man consumed by vision, yet tender enough to notice when her hands grew cold and place his coat gently over her shoulders. To the world, Alexander Steele was destined to be powerful, a man who could shape industries, but to Elena he had been the boy who once promised her that no matter how high he climbed, he would always come back to her. Elena was not a woman who demanded the world. Her strength came from her quiet steadiness, her ability to endure storms without breaking. Where others sought wealth, she sought meaning. Where others craved grand gestures, she valued the small acts of love, his hand reaching for hers under the dinner table, his laughter when she teased him about his terrible cooking. She had built her life on the belief that love, when nurtured, could weather anything, and for a time, it seemed true. Their marriage was not perfect, but it was passionate. Nights spent talking until dawn, mornings where the coffee grew cold because they were too busy dreaming together, those memories clung to her heart like fragile glass she dared not shatter. But ambition is a demanding lover. When Alexander began building his empire, Elena felt the shift. At first, it was subtle, a missed dinner here, a late night at the office there. She understood, or at least told herself she did. Success required sacrifice, and she wanted to be his anchor, not his burden. Yet as weeks turned to months, the balance tipped. Phone calls went unanswered, vacations were postponed. Even when he was home, his mind was elsewhere, drawn to contracts, mergers, and the endless chase for more. Still, the fire between them had not died. Whenever he allowed himself to pause, even briefly, the old Alexander would surface. He would pull her into his arms, whispering that she was the only reason he fought so hard, that without her, none of it mattered, and Elena believed him, because she wanted to. She wanted to believe that underneath the armor of the rising millionaire, the man she loved was still fighting to hold on to her. But silence crept in where words once lived. Pride sealed their lips when it should have opened them. Elena longed to say, "I am losing you, even as you sit beside me." Alexander wanted to confess, "I am terrified that if I stop, I will fail you." Yet neither spoke. Their hearts were still burning, but the walls between them grew higher. Nights that had once been filled with laughter turned into empty spaces, where two souls lay inches apart yet miles away. Elena watched the man she loved rise higher and higher, and with each step he took into the world of power, she felt him slip further from her grasp. And though Alexander stood in boardrooms commanding respect, the image that haunted him was not the applause of investors but the quiet disappointment in Elena's eyes whenever he came home too late. He had everything he thought he wanted: wealth, recognition, influence, but with every victory, he felt the cost. Because what good was a kingdom if the queen who once shared his throne no longer felt at home in it? Their marriage had not ended in rage or betrayal. It ended in the most painful way possible, with love still alive, but smothered beneath pride and silence. Two people who had once promised forever now stood on opposite sides of an invisible chasm, each waiting for the other to bridge it, each too afraid to show how much they still ached. And as Elena folded his empty shirts one quiet evening, she realized that love was not always enough if it was not seen, not heard, not chosen every single day. That truth, unspoken and unbearable, was the seed of their undoing. Yet even as they drifted apart, neither of them truly let go. Love does not disappear simply because silence takes its place. It lingers, waiting for the moment fate dares to give it another chance. The morning was heavy with silence when Elena stepped out of the courthouse. The papers in her hand felt like a death sentence she had signed with her own trembling fingers. Around her, life moved on with its usual indifference. Cars rushed past, strangers hurried to work, the city breathed, but for her, everything had stopped. She had loved Alexander Steele with every breath, yet now she was walking away from him with tears burning her eyes and a hollow ache inside her chest. Inside that same courthouse, Alexander lingered, his hand still stiff from pressing his signature against the final page of their divorce. His empire was thriving, his face was on business magazines, and yet he felt as though he had lost the only victory that ever mattered. He wanted to call out to her, to tear up the papers, to beg her to stay, but his pride stood in the way. Pride whispered that a man like him could not appear weak. Pride told him to let her go even as his heart screamed for her. Elena remembered how his eyes had not left hers when the judge asked if it was truly what she wanted. She had almost said no, she had almost begged him to fight for her, but he remained silent, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable, and so she whispered yes, not because she wanted freedom but because she could no longer endure the endless nights of waiting for him to come home, the loneliness of being invisible to the man who once adored her. The drive back to her small apartment was a blur. The life they had built together now belonged to another world, a world she could not step into again. She placed the divorce papers on the table and stared at them as if they were foreign, as if they could not possibly belong to her story. Her hands shook as she touched the edge of the paper. This was the proof that two people could still love each other fiercely and yet fail to keep that love alive. Meanwhile, Alexander returned to his office, the top floor of a gleaming skyscraper that symbolized his triumph. His employees greeted him with respect, investors waited eagerly for his next move, but he felt none of the satisfaction he once craved. The leather chair beneath him offered no comfort, the skyline outside his window no sense of pride. All he saw was Elena's face as she walked away, her tears reflecting everything he had refused to say. He had built a kingdom of glass and steel, but in doing so, he had shattered the only home that mattered, her heart. The city carried whispers of their separation, friends speculated, acquaintances gossiped, but none understood the truth. It was not betrayal or hatred that ended their marriage, it was silence, the slow suffocation of unspoken words, the pride that refused to bend. They parted not because they no longer loved, but because they did, and that was the most painful truth of all. Elena tried to find peace in solitude. She filled her evenings with books and her mornings with work, pretending her heart was not breaking anew each time she saw his name in the headlines. Alexander tried to drown his regret in endless deals and gala dinners, but each victory tasted bitter without her smile waiting for him at the end of the day. That night, alone in their separate worlds, they both sat in silence, staring at the shadows around them. And though neither spoke it aloud, both knew the truth. Their story was not finished. Love this strong did not die with a signature, it lingered, restless, waiting for the moment fate would twist their paths together again. Time passed, but neither Elena nor Alexander truly escaped the shadows of what they had lost. Elena tried to bury herself in her new job at a small publishing house tucked away on a quiet street. The office was nothing like the glittering world she once shared with Alexander. It smelled of paper and ink, the shelves stacked high with forgotten stories. She found comfort in the routine, in editing manuscripts and guiding new authors, yet even here his presence haunted her. Whenever she read a line about love lost or characters torn apart by fate, she felt her chest tighten as though the words were speaking directly to her own wounds. Alexander, on the other hand, continued to rise higher. His name appeared on television screens, his face printed on glossy covers, his empire stretching across continents. To the world he was untouchable, a man who seemed to have everything. But behind the sharp suits and cold headlines was a man restless at night, pacing penthouse floors while remembering the warmth of Elena's laughter. His wealth multiplied, but the silence in his home grew louder, echoing the absence of the woman who once filled it with life. Despite their attempts to move on, fate refused to let them forget. Elena still saw his name in every financial article she skimmed, still overheard whispers of his latest triumph whenever she passed coffee shops. She never sought him out, yet he was everywhere, like a ghost who would not leave her side. Alexander too found himself unconsciously reaching for her number in his phone before stopping himself, his pride locking his fingers in place. He would attend glittering galas surrounded by admirers, yet every time a woman in a simple dress entered the room his heart would skip, hoping it was her. One evening as rain tapped against her window, Elena returned home to find an envelope on her doorstep. It bore the elegant seal of Stay, Ely Enterprises. Her breath caught as she opened it. Inside was an invitation to a charity gala, a grand affair attended by the city's most powerful. She froze, her hands trembling. It was his event. Her name had been chosen deliberately. For a long moment she stood motionless, torn between fear and longing. Was it a cruel twist of fate or was he reaching out? That night she could not sleep. Her mind raced with questions. Should she go and risk reopening the wound she had fought so hard to close, or should she stay away and forever wonder what might have happened had she faced him again? She sat by the window until dawn, clutching the invitation, the city lights blurring with her tears. At the same time, Alexander stared at his own reflection in the vast windows of his office. He had planned the guest list himself. He had told himself it was just business, just courtesy, but deep down he knew the truth. He wanted her there. He wanted to see if the fire between them still existed, if time had truly buried what once made his heart alive. Two souls, once bound and then broken, were being pulled together again by forces neither could resist. Suspense lingered in the air, thick and heavy, as the night of the gala approached. Both Elena and Alexander knew that when they saw each other again, the past would not remain buried. Something would ignite, something powerful enough to either heal them or destroy them forever. The night of the gala loomed closer with every passing hour, and Elena found herself standing before the mirror in her small apartment, staring at a woman she barely recognized. The dress she chose was simple but elegant, midnight blue that clung to her form with quiet grace. She had not worn something like this since the days when she and Alexander had attended events as husband and wife. Back then she had always walked into those glittering rooms with his arms steady around her waist. Tonight she would walk alone. Her hands trembled as she clasped a delicate necklace at her throat. Memories flooded back uninvited, his voice whispering that she was the most beautiful woman in the room, the way his gaze lingered as though she were the only person who existed. She shook the memories away, but the ache remained. This was not just another night, this was the night fate had chosen to test her resolve. Across the city, Alexander was already at the Grand Hotel where the gala would unfold. The ballroom glowed with crystal chandeliers, gold-trimmed tables, and the hum of anticipation as society's most influential gathered. Yet his mind was not on the investors he needed to charm or the deals waiting to be sealed. His mind was on her. He had imagined her entrance 100 times since the invitation was sent, but the thought of truly seeing her again made his heart pound in a way he could not control. Guests arrived in sparkling gowns and polished suits, cameras flashed at the entrance, capturing every arrival, but Alexander's eyes remained fixed on the doors, as though waiting for a ghost. The minutes stretched unbearably until at last she appeared. Elena stepped into the room, and the air seemed to shift. Conversation faltered, heads turned, and even the orchestra missed a beat. She did not come adorned in diamonds or wrapped in luxury, yet she glowed with a quiet radiance that no jewel could rival. Alexander's breath caught. For a moment he forgot the world around him. The years melted away, and all he saw was the woman he had once promised to love forever. Every carefully built wall of pride inside him threatened to crumble. Elena's gaze swept across the room until it landed on him. Their eyes locked, and the noise of the gala faded into silence. Neither moved, neither spoke, yet the weight of everything they had left unsaid pressed heavily between them. Whispers rippled among the guests. Everyone knew the history of Alexander Steele and his former wife. Some whispered pity, others intrigue, but Elena stood tall, her chin lifted, as though determined not to let the crowd see the storm inside her. She gave him the smallest nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, and then moved further into the ballroom. Alexander's fiancée clung to his arm, smiling for the cameras, but he barely noticed her presence. His eyes followed Elena with a hunger he could no longer disguise. The gala had only just begun, yet already the night was charged with a tension that promised something unforgettable. Elena tried to lose herself among the guests, greeting acquaintances and avoiding questions about her life. But she could feel his eyes on her, burning with everything he could not say. Each step she took seemed to draw her closer to him, even as she fought to keep her distance. The music swelled, the chandeliers sparkled, and the night held its breath. The stage was set. Two hearts once parted by silence now stood in the same room, surrounded by wealth and witnesses, with destiny quietly weaving its dangerous threads. Elena felt it deep inside. This was no ordinary night. Something was coming, something that would change everything she thought she knew about endings and second chances. The ballroom pulsed with golden light as the orchestra played a waltz that sent couples gliding across the polished floor. Laughter and conversation filled the air, but Elena felt none of it. Every glance, every whisper seemed to trail after her like shadows. She could sense Alexander's presence before she even turned her head, the weight of his stare pressing against her as surely as if he had touched her. She tried to steady her breath, but her pulse betrayed her, quickening with each moment that passed. Alexander moved through the crowd like a man possessed, greeting investors with mechanical smiles, answering questions with practiced charm, but his attention never wavered from her. He had built empires on calculated moves, yet tonight calculation abandoned him. The sight of Elena in that simple midnight gown made him forget every deal, every strategy. She was not dressed like the jeweled women around her, but to him she eclipsed them all. Elena held a glass of champagne, though she barely touched it. She felt exposed under the weight of his gaze, as if the years between them had vanished and she was once again the young woman who had loved him with reckless devotion. Yet now she also carried the memory of long nights alone, of phone calls unanswered, of the cold distance that had broken her heart. Her chest ached with conflicting emotions, longing and fear, anger and tenderness, all warring within her. The murmurs grew louder when Alexander finally broke away from the crowd and crossed the room toward her. Every step he took was deliberate, steady, the kind of stride that made entire boardrooms fall silent. But this time it was not business that drove him forward, it was her. When he reached her, the music seemed to hush, as if the world itself leaned closer to witness. He extended his hand, his voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried an undeniable calm. "And, dance with me." Elena's heart jolted. For a moment she stood frozen, the past crashing over her in waves. she could refuse, walk away, protect the fragile walls she had built around herself, but the pull was too strong. Against every warning in her mind, her hand lifted and settled into his. His touch was warm, familiar, achingly missed. The orchestra swelled as he led her onto the dance floor. The crowd parted, eyes following them, breaths held in anticipation, and then they moved together, bodies falling into rhythm as though no time had passed. The room blurred, chandeliers fading into a haze, until it was only them, two souls circling each other in silence, bound by a love neither had been able to bury. Alexander's hand pressed gently against the small of her back, guiding her with certainty, while his eyes searched hers with unspoken desperation. Elena fought to keep her composure, but her heart betrayed her, pounding so loudly she thought he might hear it. She wanted to look away, but she could not. His gaze held her captive, speaking the words he had never said, apologies, confessions, promises, all hidden in the intensity of his stare. The song lingered longer than most, each note pulling them deeper into the storm of what once was and what could be again. When it finally ended, Alexander did not let go. His hand lingered at her back, his fingers brushing against hers as though he could not bear to release her. The ballroom erupted in applause, but it felt hollow, distant, nothing compared to the quiet thunder between them. Elena stepped back, breathless, her lips trembling as if she might speak, but no words came. She could not trust her voice, she could not trust herself. With a faint nod, she turned and slipped away into the crowd, leaving Alexander standing alone on the floor, his chest rising with the weight of everything he had just felt. He watched her disappear into the sea of glittering gowns and black suits, a single thought burning in his mind: he would not lose her again. Whatever pride, whatever obstacles, whatever sacrifices it demanded, this night would not end the way the last had. Suspense tightened around him like a vow. The world thought this was just another gala, but Alexander knew it was the beginning of something dangerous, something unstoppable, something that could either save them or break them forever. Elena slipped into the crowd after the dance, her heart still racing, her hands trembling as though the music had never ended. She wanted to believe she had imagined it all, the way his eyes had burned into hers, the way his touch had felt like a claim, but deep down she knew it had been real. The years apart had not diminished what they shared, they had only buried it beneath silence, and tonight, in one stolen dance, it had risen again with a force that terrified her. Across the ballroom, Alexander searched for her through the glittering chaos, but before he could move another step, a voice cut through the air, a woman's voice, elegant, sharp, dripping with possession. "There you are, Alexander." His fiancée appeared at his side, her jeweled gown shimmering under the chandelier light, her arm sliding possessively through his. She was everything the papers loved to write about: beautiful, wealthy, influential, but in that moment Alexander felt only the suffocating weight of her presence. She leaned closer, her lips brushing his ear. "People are whispering," she hissed softly. "Whispering about you and her." Alexander's jaw tightened. He did not need to ask who she meant. The rumors were already alive, spreading like wildfire through the ballroom. He could hear them in fragments as he passed groups of guests, her name paired with his, their history dissected, their dance described with fascinate. Tie-in, the crowd loved a scandal, and tonight they had been given one. Elena stood near the far end of the room, pretending to listen to an old acquaintance, but her ears caught every word, every rumor. She felt the sting of eyes on her, felt the judgment in their stares. Once she had been the wife of a man who promised her forever, now she was painted as a ghost from the past threatening his future. Her chest tightened and she fought to keep her composure, but beneath the calm surface a storm raged. Alexander's fiancée tightened her grip on him and guided him toward Elena. The air thickened with tension as they approached, conversations faltering, guests turning to watch. The woman's smile was sweet, but her eyes burned with cold fury. "Elena," she said smoothly, her tone laced with hidden venom, "what a surprise to see you here." Elena returned the smile with quiet dignity, though her heart pounded. She wanted to turn and walk away, but something inside her refused. She would not shrink, she would not let anyone see her as weak. Alexander stood between them, his silence louder than words, his eyes flicking desperately to Elena, as though begging her to read the truth in them. The fiancée tilted her head, her hand tightening on his arm. "You should know," she continued, her voice meant to carry to nearby ears, "Alexander and I are to be married soon. We are very happy together." The words cut through Elena like glass, though she showed no reaction. She simply nodded, her lips forming a polite reply she did not feel. "I wish you both happiness." Then she stepped back, her eyes lowering just enough to hide the pain, before turning away, but Alexander did not move. He watched her walk into the crowd, his fiancée tugging at his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve, but he barely felt it. All he saw was the woman he had let go once before, the woman he could not lose again, and though the night was far from over, Alexander knew one thing with absolute certainty: his silence had already cost him once. Tonight, silence would not win. The orchestra struck a new melody, a haunting rhythm that filled the air with longing, but Elena barely heard it as she slipped toward the edge of the ballroom. She wanted to disappear, to escape the whispers and the watchful eyes, yet every step away felt like an admission of defeat. She had promised herself she would not crumble before him, not tonight, not ever again. Still her heart betrayed her, aching with every glance she stole back toward Alexander. Alexander stood rooted in place, his fiancée clinging to his arm, but the distance between him and Elena felt like an unbearable void. Every instinct in him screamed to chase her, to stop her before she vanished into the glittering crowd. His pride fought back, reminding him of the eyes upon him, of the expectations, of the engagement his name was tied to, but pride had already destroyed them once, and the thought of repeating that mistake tightened around his chest like a noose. He turned to his fiancée, her lips curved in a victorious smile, her eyes daring him to defy her. For years he had played the role of the perfect man in public, but tonight he felt the mask shatter. Without a word he removed her hand from his arm and stepped away. Gasps rippled through the nearby guests. The woman's smile froze, her anger flashing like a blade, but Alexander did not glance back. His eyes were fixed only on Elena. The music swelled as he moved through the crowd, each step deliberate, every whisper of scandal following in his wake. Elena felt him before she saw him, the heat of his presence cutting through the noise. She turned, her breath catching as he stopped before her, his hand extended once again, the weight of his gaze unyielding. "Dance with me," he said, his voice steady but low, almost desperate. She froze. Around them the ballroom waited, the crowd holding its breath. Elena's pulse raced. She knew what it meant. If she accepted. It was more than a dance. It was an acknowledgement that the fire between them was not gone, that no amount of pride or years or heartbreak had extinguished it. Refusing would be safer, easier, but safety had never been the truth of their love. Slowly, as if against her own will, she placed her hand in his. A murmur spread through the room as Alexander pulled her into the center of the floor. The orchestra hesitated, then shifted into a softer tune, as though the music itself bent to their story. The moment their bodies moved together, the world blurred away. Alexander held her close, his hand firm at her waist, his eyes never leaving hers. Elena wanted to hate him, wanted to remember the nights she cried alone, but as they moved she felt her defenses crumbling. The heat of him, the familiarity, the raw ache in his eyes, it was all too real. "You never stopped loving me," he whispered, barely audible above the music. Admitted Elena. Her lips trembled. She wanted to deny it, to push him away, but the truth was written in the tears threatening to fall. The silence between them was louder than the orchestra, a silence heavy with everything they had left unsaid. When the song ended, the ballroom erupted into thunderous applause, but to Elena it felt like the ground beneath her was trembling. She pulled away, shaking, and turned as if to escape, but Alexander's hand caught hers. His grip was firm, unyielding, a promise in the making. "This night is not over," he said, his voice low and fierce, "not for us." The crowd roared with curiosity, the fiancé seethed at the edge of the room, and Elena's heart raced with terror and longing. The dance had awakened what both had tried to bury, and now nothing could stop what was coming. Something powerful had begun, something the world itself seemed eager to witness. The applause faded into murmurs, and the ballroom filled with a tense electricity as Alexander's words echoed in Elena's chest. "This night is not over." She tried to pull her hand back, but his grip was strong, his eyes pleading in a way she had never seen before. For a moment she felt the world tilt, as if every soul in that room had disappeared, and only the two of them remained, suspended in a fragile moment that could shatter at any second. He guided her away from the crowd, down a quiet corridor lined with velvet curtains and golden sconces that flickered like torches. Elena's breath quickened as the noise of the gala grew distant, replaced by the pounding of her heart. She wanted to demand why he was doing this, why he was reopening wounds she had spent years trying to close, but when she turned to him she saw a storm in his eyes that silenced every word on her tongue. "I never stopped loving you," he said at last, his voice raw, stripped of the polished charm he wore in public. "Every night without you has been unbearable. Every deal I made, every empire I built, it meant nothing, because I couldn't share it with you." Elena shook her head, her voice trembling. "You say that now, but where were you when I needed you? Where were you when I cried alone in our bed, begging for you to just come home?" He flinched at her words, his jaw tightening as though struck. "I was a fool," he admitted. "I thought if I gave you the world, it would be enough. But I was blind, Elena. I didn't see that all you ever wanted was me." Her eyes filled with tears. "And now? You stand here telling me this while the entire city knows you are engaged to someone else. Do you expect me to believe these words when another woman wears your promise?" Before Alexander could speak, a voice sliced through the air like a blade. "Believe nothing, he belongs to me." His fiancée had followed them, her heels stretched and king the marble floor like thunder. Her eyes burned with fury as she stepped into the corridor, her voice sharp enough to draw the attention of guests nearby. "How dare you?" she spat, glaring at Elena. "Haven't you taken enough from him already? Do you think you can waltz back into his life and steal him away?" Elena's face hardened though her heart trembled. "I don't want to steal anything," she whispered. "I only came tonight to stand on my own." The fiancé laughed coldly, her voice echoing. "Stand on your own? Do you not see the truth? He chose me. He is mine." Alexander's chest heaved as the silence stretched, the weight of choice pressing against him like a mountain. The corridor was now filled with whispers from curious onlookers, their eyes gleaming with scandal. Elena looked at him, her voice breaking. "Say something, Alexander, do not stand silent again." This was the moment he had avoided for years, the moment when pride had always bound his tongue, but tonight the chains shattered. He turned to his fiancée, his voice steady but cold. "You are wrong, I never chose you, my heart never left her." Gasps erupted from the gathering crowd, Elena's lips parted in shock, her tears spilling freely. The fiancée's face twisted in rage, her hand trembling as she raised it as if to strike him, but Alexander caught her wrist mid-air. His voice thundered, filled with the power of a man no longer willing to bow to silence. "I will not live another day chained to lies. My heart belongs to Elena, it always has." The fiancée wrenched free, her fury igniting into humiliation. "You will regret this," she hissed before storming back toward the ballroom. Elena stood frozen, her world spinning. The confession she had begged for years ago was finally laid bare, but now it came at a cost. The crowd was alive with whispers, reputations on the verge of collapse, and yet in the center of it all Alexa. Ender looked only at her. "I would burn every empire I built if it meant I could hold you again," he whispered, his voice trembling with truth. "Please, Elena, tell me it isn't too late." The night crackled with suspense, the air thick with expectation. For the first time in years Alexander Steele had bared his soul, and now, with the world watching, Elena had to decide if she could forgive the silence that once destroyed them, or if this confession had come far too late. The air in the corridor was heavy with whispers, the crowd pressing closer, hungry for the scandal unfolding before their eyes. Elena's heart pounded as she looked at Alexander, her mind a storm of emotions. He had just declared his love for her in front of everyone, shattering his engagement and risking his name, but the wounds of the past still cut deep. She could not decide if this was redemption or another illusion born of passion and guilt. Alexander sensed her hesitation, and for a moment fear flickered in his eyes. He had built empires, conquered boardrooms, commanded respect from men twice his age, yet nothing terrified him like the thought of losing her again. He drew a breath, and with a suddenness that silenced even the loudest whispers, he stepped back into the ballroom. The chandeliers glittered above as every head turned toward him. The orchestra faltered, the music dying mid-note. Alexander raised his hand, his voice steady and commanding. "May I have everyone's attention?" The ballroom fell into silence. Elena froze at the edge of the crowd, her breath shallow, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had seen Alexander command thousands before, but never like this, never with such raw urgency burning beneath his polished exterior. He turned his gaze to Elena, and then, in front of the entire assembly of the city's elite, he dropped to one knee. Gasps filled the room, the sound of shock cascading through the glittering hall. His eyes never left hers as he pulled a velvet box from his jacket, opening it to reveal a ring that caught the light like fire. Elena's hands, too, trembled, her throat tight. The world blurred around her as his voice rang out, unshaken and fierce. "Years ago I let pride destroy the best thing in my life. I let you walk away when I should have fought for you. I let silence steal the words my heart was screaming. But not tonight. Tonight I choose you, Elena. In front of everyone, I ask you to forgive me, to give us one more chance. Marry me again." The room erupted in whispers, some filled with awe, others with scandal. The fiancée who had stormed away only minutes before reappeared at the far side of the hall, her face pale with fury. A few guests turned their eyes toward Elena with pity, others with envy, but all waited breathlessly for her answer. Elena's heart raced, her tears threatening to fall. This was the man who had once broken her, the man whose silence had left her nights hollow. Yet here he was now, on his knees, his voice unshaken, bearing his soul in a way she had long ago believed he never could. Alexander's hand trembled as he held the ring out toward her, but his gaze never wavered. If she said no, it would ruin him, humiliate him before the world, but for once he did not care about the world, all he cared about was her. The silence stretched unbearably, the entire ballroom hanging on her breath. Elena's lips parted, but no words came. The choice lay before her: walk away again, or step into the fire of a love that refused to die. And just as she drew breath to speak, the orchestra struck a single trembling note, the chandeliers swayed with the force of whispers, and the world seemed to hold itself still, waiting for her answer. The ballroom was silent, so silent that Elena could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Alexander was still on one knee before her, the ring glimmering in his hand, his eyes raw and unguarded. Every soul in the room leaned closer, waiting to see if the woman who had once walked away from him would do it again. Elena's chest rose and fell, her breath trembling. She saw the man she had married, the man she had lost, the man who had broken her heart with silence, but she also saw the man who had just thrown away his reputation, who had shattered his engagement, who had dared to kneel before her with nothing but truth in his eyes. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, barely audible, "Alexander." The crowd gasped as she stepped forward, her hand reached out, shaking, brushing against his. For a moment, no one knew what she would do. She could have pulled him to his feet and walked away, she could have left him broken in front of the entire city, but instead her voice rose, soft but filled with power. "Yes." The word rippled through the ballroom like lightning. The orchestra froze, the guests erupted into shocked cries, and the fiancée let out a strangled gasp before fleeing the hall, her gown trailing like a storm behind her. Alexander exhaled as if he had been holding his breath for years. He slipped the ring onto Elena's finger, his hands trembling, then pulled her into his arms as the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. But the night was not done. As Alexander held her, he leaned close, his voice meant for her alone. "I ended the engagement weeks ago. I planned all of this the moment I saw your name on the guest list. I knew if I got one more chance, I would not waste it." Elena's breath caught, her tears falling freely now. He had not acted on impulse, not a reckless whim. This was a choice he had prepared for, a choice he had carved into his heart. She realized then that this was not the Alexander who had let pride destroy them. This was a man who had been humbled by loss and remade by love. The orchestra struck up a triumphant tune, and Alexander took her hand, guiding her into the center of the ballroom once more. Guests cheered, glasses were raised, and yet for Elena, the world blurred into nothing but the man who held her as though he had been starving for her touch. They moved together in the dance, not as strangers burdened by silence, but as lovers reborn from the ashes of their mistakes. As the music swelled, Alexander whispered one final vow. "This time, Elena, I will not let you go, not for pride, not for ambition, not for anything." And as she leaned her head against his chest, she believed him. The tears that had once marked their parting were now tears of a new beginning. The night that began as a test of fate had transformed into a story that would be whispered across the city for years, a story of love lost, love broken, and love reborn in the most unexpected of ways.